Hello everyone, it's Osmotips here. Osmotips has been going on for exactly 3 months today. And what started off as a small little project to create the world's longest selfie stick has now quickly become the best place for Osmo tips, tricks, Q&As, tutorials and much more. And thanks to you, this week we reached the magic 1,000 subscribers. Wee-hoo! Thanks a lot. That's incredible, isn't it? But I think it's now time to take things a little slow. Who am I trying to kid? I'm talking about slow motion. So this week's video has to be how to achieve the best slow motion footage on your DJI Osmo. Are you ready for it? Take it away!
So let's take a look at the first of the 3 methods available to achieve slow motion on the Osmo. The first method, I'm calling this one the DJI Osmo method. So to access this is really simple. First, let's go into our DJI app, right? So all I've done is I've just stuck the Osmo outside. And so the first method, all you do really in video mode, obviously, you come to this auto button, you click that once, and then you get 2 options. Auto, which is currently where we're at. So auto is the setting for every other mode of video, whether it's 4K, 1080p, 720p, whatever it is. The only other option you've got is slow motion. So when you select that, you simply click to select. Now, the moment you slide that switch, a couple of things have happened already. Firstly, the video resolution is automatically set to 1080p. At the same time, the frame rate has gone up to 120 frames per second. So that's the slow motion video resolution and frame rate, 1080p and 120 frames per second. However, the most dramatic change comes in the way this image actually looks. So suddenly, this image is now cropped to almost half of what it was. Let's take a look at what I mean. So let's go back to auto. So if we just use the top of the trampoline ring here as a measure of, this is the normal view that we're getting in the auto mode. So this oval shape is currently occupying, I would say maybe a quarter of the whole screen. But if I click to slow motion, notice how it's almost occupying certainly more than half of the entire screen. This is referred to as the field of view. So the field of view changes dramatically when you go to the slow motion mode. To understand this simply, our eyes see a particular amount of width at any one time. And although for the naked eye, it's extremely hard to determine exactly what this normal human field of view is, because peripheral vision is also wide, although it tends to get unfocused at the edges. So for this reason, the human eye field of view is quite difficult to quantify. A camera lens also has a field of view, which is determined by that lens's focal length. Now, without getting too technical, the focal length is basically measured in millimeters from the middle of the lens to the principal point of focus of the lens. So in the case of the DJI Osmo, and I'm sure you've noticed whenever we're talking DJI Osmo in this series of videos, it's mainly referring to the Zenmuse X3 camera. That's the one we have. We don't have the X5 camera as yet. So all references in most of our videos is going to be X3, unless otherwise we mention that it's X5 camera. So in the case of the DJI Osmo Zenmuse X3 camera, which has a fixed lens, as we know, and we also know that it has a fixed aperture of 2.8. It has a focal length of 3.6 millimeters, which is equivalent to 20 millimeters. That's the focal length. Now, none of these specs matter that much except for this number here, which is 94 degrees FOV. That's field of view. So this means the Osmo X3 camera in its auto mode has a field of view angle of 94 degrees. Now that we know what field of view is, let's see now what actually happens when we switch to the slow motion mode. So we already said the image has been cropped by almost half. And this is as a direct result of the field of view reducing from the 94 degrees, which is what it was here, to 47 degrees. Now that's almost half of the available real estate to shoot gone, just like that. So that's a pretty significant difference right there. Let's take a look at at what this difference looks like in real life. So I'm going to play back this clip here, which I shot at 1080p, and I'm playing it back at 25 frames per second. Now compare this same shot with this slow motion shot and see how much the slow motion footage is cropped. Compare where we have the edges of this image, how that compares to the full 1080p clip, just to get a sense of how much cropping is happening in the slow motion. So we're losing a lot of real estate, as I call it. Now the other important thing to note is the frame rate, which we said is now 120 frames per second. So slow motion mode automatically picks 120 frames per second. If we follow the exposure triangle rule that we talked about a couple of videos ago, that we mentioned that, you know, to get acceptable motion blur, your shutter speed ought to be 1 over twice the frame rate. In this case, 1 over twice 120, so 1 over 240. Now that's a relatively short time for the shutter to let in light compared to a shutter speed that we're normally using of 1 over 50 or 1 over 60 if you're shooting in 25 or 30 frames per second respectively. So as a result of that very short shutter speed duration, the images that you shoot in this slow-mo mode tend to be much darker when you look at them compared to real life conditions. In addition to this massive narrowing of the field of view and this cropping and the darkening of the image, the footage also looks quite grainy and mushy, if I can call it that, when you compare it to the normal 1080p. So, and also it appears to be much softer due to a lack of critical focus. So you might be wondering, is there anything good about it? Well, the one good thing is, although you've shot at 120 frames per second, the file that you actually get off the micro SD card is already a processed or a rendered file, meaning it's already processed at 25 frames per second. So what's happened is original footage was shot at 120 frames per second. It's processed in camera to give you a slow motion footage of 25 frames per second when it plays back. So that can be one good thing if you really don't want to mess around with doing any post-processing when you've shot slow motion. You want to use it as is. That could be a big advantage then. So for this second method, I'm going to have to jump over to the computer and walk you through this second method and the third method. So the first thing you want to do is you want to shoot your video in the full auto mode, which means you get to use the full field of view or the Osmo, no cropping whatsoever. Next, you want to make sure you select the highest frame rate available in the video mode that you're in. So this will be either 50 frames per second for PAL and 60 frames per second for NTSC. And both of these will be in 1080p, which is the highest resolution available at these high frame rates. So again, try and stick to the shutter speed rule, the exposure triangle rule, where you use a pretty low ISO as well as a shutter speed of 1 over double the frame rate. By shooting this way, you're shooting in a method that is often referred to as overcranking. So I've just brought this clip here into the Adobe Premiere Pro project, and if I just highlight on this clip, you can see the details of this clip. So it was shot at 1920 by 1080p and at 50 frames per second. So, and if we think about this final video for a second, the final video that I want to create, suppose I want to create my final video that's going to be watchable in 25 frames per second. So what I want to do is I'll create a sequence. So if I simply drag this to create a new sequence, and if I go to the sequence settings, you see that the frame rate here is actually 50, but I want to choose a frame rate of 25 frames per second as my final video. That way we can use this overcranking method, and I'll now explain how it works. So let me just delete this. So we've got, all I've done is I've created a sequence of 25 frames per second, and my clip was shot at 50 frames per second. Now all I need to do now is just to identify the portion of my clip which I want. So I'm simply going to drag through this. You see there's a point where this shoe is flying off from this girl who's swinging here. There. So that's the part that I basically want to capture. So I think it's from about, let's say from about there. So all I can simply do is I can create a sub clip of that selection. Now let's call that test overcrank, test. Okay. Now because I've now got this sequence which is at the final frame rate that I want, which is 25 frames per second, I can drag this into the timeline, keep my existing settings because it's picked up that this frame rate and the frame rate of the sequence are different, but I want to keep this original frame rate here. Now if I play this back, all I'm doing is I'm playing back footage shot at 50 frames per second on a timeline which is actually set at 25. So all I'm really getting is I'm getting maybe elimination of any motion blur, because 50 frames per second being played inside a timeline of 25 frames per second. But that's not what I want to do here. What I want to do here is to create a slow motion footage. So I've got two methods I can do it. The first method, really easy. All I do is right click and then select speed, duration. You can also use a shortcut Command R if you're on a Mac. And so when you get this window, all we want to do is to basically, we want to reduce the speed by 50%. And we can afford to do that because we've shot for every second, we've got 50 frames in the original footage, but because our timeline sequence only requires 25 frames per second, that effectively means we've got double the amount of frames to play with, if you like. So we can afford to stretch them out, and that's the process of slowing down the footage. We're basically slowing it down by half by going for 50%, and as you can see, the duration here will double by 50%. Now when we play that back, we can see the shoe flying off there. So again, let me just mute this. So if we play back the original, so that's original speed, and this is the one where we've brought back where we've cut the speed by half. So when you render this, you then get the overcranked method that I'm calling method 1. There's also another way to create the same effect here, and that is to, let me just duplicate this. We've got this copy here. That is to basically right click on this clip, then you go to modify, then you go to interpret footage. Now it'll give you how you want to interpret this new footage. So you can then assume a new frame rate of 25 in our case, and then if you click OK, so if we just look at this new footage here, it's now 25 frames per second. So if I drag that into any new timeline, and if I play it back, you can see it's also playing back in slow motion. The second method uses Adobe's powerful feature of dynamic linking. This is where we can open a clip in our timeline. So again, let me start with a brand new, let's get rid of this one. Let me just drag this into the footage, keep existing settings. We don't want to change that. If we play that back, so we see this is playing back at original speed. Okay, now what we now can do is we can now open this same clip inside of Adobe After Effects, because Adobe After Effects has got this feature called frame blending, which we want to make use of in this example. So frame blending allows you to further slow down the overcranked footage by using a slightly different method of frame blending. Frame blending essentially is adding frames between two adjacent frames in such a way that it kind of blends, it kind of fills in the gaps between two frames, because when you want to stretch the footage by as much as 4 times, in the previous example it was only 2 times, but if you want to stretch it by as much as 4 times, then you're going to have a choppy looking footage if you don't do anything between the 2 frames. So what frame blending allows you to do is it allows you to sort of like fill in the gap with additional frames that it is blending between frame 1 and frame 2. So that's as much as I'll explain. We can go into a whole lot more technical stuff about frame blending, but that's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is just to show you that additional method. So here's how it works. So within Adobe Premiere Pro timeline, simply click on the clip that you want to frame blend, right click on it, and then scroll down to replace with After Effects composition. What this will do is it will open up a sequence of Adobe After Effects right here, and then the same clip is linked dynamically, which means whatever you do to this clip in Adobe After Effects, those same changes. So let's just test one. So whatever you do inside of After Effects, the same changes are brought through this timeline. Notice how this color is changed to show that it is dynamically linked. Now what we want to do within Adobe After Effects to do the frame blending is, first of all, you want to basically come to the composition here. If we go composition settings, basically want to increase and I normally just double the duration of the composition so that, you know, there's leeway for it to stretch right to the end like that. Now this is the feature that you want to make use of, this stretch feature. So you see we currently set on 100%, and before you actually apply this stretching, first of all you want to click this button here, which enables the global frame blending for all the layers, but specifically you also want to apply this frame blending to this particular clip. Now once you've clicked that and that, then what you want to then do is, this time we want to stretch it to 400, or stretch it by a factor of 400%. What effectively means is this is going to be 4 times slower. So if we start to play that back, you can now start to see that shoe coming off, and that's how slow it's become. And if you look closely, you can actually see this is a blended frame that appears almost like a ghost frame, if you like. That's an actual frame, and then as you go you can see the blended frames. But obviously when you, the whole idea is when you play it back in the normal speed, you should see a much slower. So those same changes have actually been brought to this, to our composition here, which we can stretch out just a little bit. Again, I'll play that back. It's a very short clip, but you get the gist of it. So these are the 3 methods that are available at your disposal when you've got the Osmo, and if you're using it in any one of these various modes. So now we're going to take a look at all these 3 methods in use being demonstrated by our fantastic crazy scientist.
Hello, today it is moi, the crazy scientist, and for some reason Osmotips wanted me to do a special segment with them, so that's what I'm going to be doing. So first I have this birthday badge, and if you didn't know, it was my birthday yesterday. So that's why I have it. And I'm going to be spinning it on its top, and then you're going to see that epic footage in slow motion. So here we go. Now let's watch that again in slow motion. Wait. Osmotips they want me to do with this slinky. Oh, and they said put on my glasses. How could I forget that? Oopsies. So, got my glasses on, and I guess we're doing this. Okay, let's watch that in slow motion. Now I can idea one of my favourite ones. It's bubbler, bubbler, bubbler. But for short, you can just call it bubbler, bubbler. Or just for really short, you can call it bubbles. So let's get started. Okay, let's watch that in slow motion. Osmotips, what are we doing next? Fizz bombs! Let's get this started. When I was a little scientist, that's what I used to do all the time. And this is where the fun begins. And I just pour it all in. Ready? And that, my friends, is called an awesome experiment. Let's get started. There, let all the fizz come out. Up. 3, 2, 1. Let's watch that epic thing in slow motion.
In conclusion, let's go through the pros and cons of each method and help you decide which method works best for your situation. So let's start off with method 1, the overcrank method. So the advantages here is, firstly, you get a full sensor image. There's no cropping involved. So what you see, well, at least you get the full field of view of 94 degrees, which is what the DJI Osmo offers. Secondly, you can use a shutter speed that allows more light in, resulting in a brighter looking footage. Third advantage is the original footage that you shot at 50 frames per second or 60 frames per second, whichever one you've chosen, is accessible in its original state. So you get a full 50 frames per second. It's not processed in camera, so you can manipulate it further at your own will. Disadvantages, well, as you saw me demonstrate, it's only 2 times slower. And that may not be slow motion enough for you. Secondly, it requires an extra processing step. I mean, you have to go into a program such as Adobe Premiere Pro, or if you're using any other programs, I'm sure they do a similar job. But as you guys know by now, I'm an Adobe fanboy, if I can call it that, through and through. So no apologies there. Method number 2, which is the frame blending method. Advantages: 1, you get the full sensor image, no cropping, full field of view. You can also use a shutter speed that allows you to get more light coming into camera. You can also achieve slow motion of up to 4 times slower, although the frames are blended frames, but you know, to the untrained eye, this may look acceptable depending on how you want to use this footage. Then also the original footage is accessible to you. Should you want to manipulate it further, you get the original 50 frames or 60 frames per second footage. Disadvantages is: 1, it may appear a little bit too choppy or too blended or kind of processed slow motion. And obviously another disadvantage is it requires 2 additional processing steps. So not only are you having to deal with Adobe Premiere Pro, but you also have to go into Adobe After Effects. And you know, this can take strain on your computer resources, depending on, you know, whether your computer can handle those processes at the same time. But if that's not an issue, and if you like the look of this frame blended slow motion, then by all means this could work for you. Then the third method, which is the DJI inbuilt slow motion mode, method 3. The advantages: firstly, there's no post-processing required. So as it comes off the SD card, it's ready to use. So that's a huge advantage, time saver. Secondly, I mean, 120 frames per second is not bad as slow motion, approximately 4 times slower. That's not too bad as well as a slow motion. However, there are several disadvantages. First, primarily, is the reduced field of view, which results in this massive cropping. You're dropping almost by half the real estate available for you to shoot. The images tend to be darker due to the shorter shutter speed. You can only go as low as 1/120 in shutter speed, as we saw. Thirdly, is the lack of sharpness. It's really, in some parts, too soft for my liking. You know, it almost appears as if it's not in focus at all. Again, some parts look grainy and mushy, like it's not really 1080p sometimes when you look at it. And then lastly, because you don't have access to the original 120 frames per second file, it's processed in camera, so what you get is already a processed file, which you may not want to have without you having access to the original 120 frames per second file. But you know, it is a method that you can use. What I will say though is, if you want to use that method number 3, what I find in use is certainly remove any filters, you know, if you can, because any filter there will just add to the amount of light that you're cutting out, and maybe as well a degree of adding that lack of critical focus. Secondly, try and light the subject as much as possible. You know, if you can use it in bright sunshine, even better. If you can add artificial lights, try that as much as possible. So the lighter the subject, the better it is. And then obviously with the shutter speed, try to go as long as it will go, which is 1/120. So use the longest shutter speed available, which is 1/120 shutter speed. So there you have it, 3 methods for you to go out there and give it a go, give it a try, see if slow motion works for you.
So we hope you enjoyed that video. And if you did, simply let us know by hitting that like button. And if you never want to miss a single video we make, simply subscribe by clicking this subscribe button. Wait, no, this one. No, this one. No, okay, why don't you just click this one? Till next time, adios amigos. See ya, and make sure to have fun shooting your DJI Osmo footage. I have an idea. So you know when I'm doing this one, no this one, you can make those YouTube signs different colours so you know they're fakes.
Yeah, like blue, yellow.
Yeah, I was thinking green and blue.
And then the real one is red, right?
Yeah.